Joining me now, Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, president of NextGen America, along with Maura Gillespie, former advisor to John Boehner, and Adam Kinzinger. Welcome. Good to see you both. Cristina, I'm curious what you make of these protests just a couple of weeks after the massive nationwide demonstrations. Does it seem like a strong resistance is finding its footing?
Yeah, I think you saw not just these rallies this weekend, but the huge rallies with Bernie and AOC across the country, people flooding the town halls of Republicans refusing to do them because of the backlash you see about so many of these issues, including, of course, people being surprised about how many Americans are responding to the questions of due process with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. You know, if you're like me that believes we have a broken immigration system that really only benefits big business because, of course, we're willing to accept undocumented workers' labor, but not their full humanity, that even beyond that in this question is the question of due process, and that the Trump administration is using migrants as the test case of how far they can go to violate constitutional norms, due process, and then they plan on turning that around, as they've already made that clear, to do against U.S. citizens, even saying they will send U.S. citizens to these gulag prisons in El Salvador next.
Yeah, and I should say that, you know, in terms of finding their footing, these protests are scheduled all across the country, all 50 states, not just big cities. Places like Tucson, Arizona, big enough city, but Eureka, California, Twin Falls, Idaho, Corvallis, Oregon. So it seems like there's an organization here that is finding its footing, Maura. But we're also seeing Republicans facing more tough crowds at the town halls, the protests becoming more frequent as well. So what cumulative impact does that have? Are congressional Republicans looking at this and thinking, might be in trouble?
Well, President Trump obviously is a lame duck president, so this isn't going to necessarily impact him, right? He's not up for re-election in 2 years, as many of the obviously House Republicans are, and some senators. So that's going to impact them directly first and foremost in 2026. But I think what it shows us right now is that while the policies that the onset and the ideas, right, of, deporting illegal criminals, people were on board with that. Poll numbers show that that was a favorable thing that the president and his administration was targeting. It's part of the reason they wanted safety and security. That was part of that as far as the 2024 November election and why he won. But I think what you're seeing now is what happens when you go too far. And the president and his administration has clearly gone too far. The Supreme Court is telling them that with the decision last night. And we've lost the humanity aspect of what's happened here to Abrego Garcia. He's a father, and he has not been criminally charged. And so the facts that come out from this case is in contrast with what the White House is saying, because they've admitted they made a mistake, and then they've then said that they're not going to do anything to change it. So that seems to be ruffling the feathers of many Americans, not just Democrats, not just independents, but Republicans as well, because the Republican Party initially, and what I stand for, is the Constitution, and this violates that.
Okay. Let's look at some poll numbers, starting with those from Yale University, Cristina, which finds young people age 18 to 21 lean Republican by more than 11 points over Democrats when asked who they would support in the midterm elections, while voters aged 22 to 29 went for Democrats by about 6 points. How do Democrats win back those youngest voters? And are young people showing up at these protests?
Yeah, and a lot of these protests are being organized in part by a lot of young Americans that care about climate. And of course, Donald Trump, for a lot of those youngest voters, right, the cohort you talked about, that 18 to 21-year-old, they were not of age, really, when Donald Trump's first administration happened. They don't remember how chaotic, how inhumane, how cruel he was. He promised to lower the price of groceries. And of course, he hasn't done that. So the real question happens, what happens over the next few months with Trump seemingly ignoring the main reason that he said he was elected was to deal with the price of groceries and the cost of housing, and how his tariffs are going to impact this cohort. So for me, I see Democrats being able to focus on these economic issues and actually show their economic plans and show that the chaos, disruption has delivered little to nothing, especially to those youngest people, which are really desperate for a different economic vision for our country than they see today.
Which brings me to this question to you, Maura. Do you think these Gen Z divide, the Gen Z divide will continue, or will Donald Trump lose these young voters if they realize, to Cristina's point, that his promises are not coming to fruition?
It may, especially I'd say this generation as well, focused heavily on TikTok, right? And the people who were surrounding and supporting the president, and as many Americans did, felt that the Democrats were out of touch and not speaking to everyday Americans. And so combating Trump by being more like Trump isn't the strategy. And I believe most Democrats know that. So they do need to find ways to amplify what Donald Trump hasn't done, promises he hasn't kept, and combat some of the messaging where he talks as if he is with them and he is on their side and he is making sure that no one takes advantage of America. Some of that stuff does resonate with a lot of Americans. So Democrats would be smart to try and combat that with pointing out where he has not kept his promises and actually failed to lower things like grocery costs, making housing more affordable. He has not done yet. And so some of these things that instead of focusing on making Canada our 51st state, he should have been focused on that.
Yeah. Okay, Maura Gillespie, Christina Simpson Ramirez. Girls, good to see you both. Thanks so much.